Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Katie Saint, and this presentation is on ACT therapy and emotional regulation. So, right now, mental health is worse than it's ever been. COVID has just been awful for people's mental health and emotional regulation and all of that kind of stuff. So, this presentation is going to go over some techniques on how to manage tough emotions and how to handle stress and just all the different things we're facing. Before I dive into that, though, I'll introduce myself. I have a PhD in behavior analysis, and my master's is in community counseling and ABA as well. I'm dual licensed as a mental health counselor and a behavior analyst. I do counseling, and then I also work for an ABA company working with people with autism. And then I teach at Pepperdine on the side. So there are a few books that I've published that are here on this slide as well. Some are on social skills, skill development, and grandparent divorce, different things like that. So when we're thinking about regulation, what we want to think about is, when is emotional regulation a problem? So if your emotions are getting in the way of your goals, that's a problem. Like if you chew out your boss or you snap at a client because you're so frustrated, that would tell us your emotional regulation needs a little work. If your emotional regulation is wrecking activities or relationships, that's a problem, right? If you feel like you're a victim to your emotions, or you feel like your emotions control you, then that means there's some emotional regulation work to do. If you feel like your values are over here and your actions are over here, that would indicate that your emotions and those drives are more of a driving force for you than your intention and your values and things like that. The cool thing is, though, that there's hope for every person alive, that we can learn regulation tools so they're not a barrier, so they're not screwing us over. But it takes intentional practice, and it takes some work to get there. So this presentation is going to walk us through a little bit of what that looks like. So when I just need to move the picture. Okay. So when people's emotions get in the way, you might hear excuses like, my emotions were too powerful to ignore. I couldn't help it because I was so angry. But that's a lie, basically, that people believe that they were victims, that they couldn't help it. And so we can learn strategies to separate from our emotions so we don't feel like a victim anymore. A lot of times we'll hear people say, my behavior was okay because XYZ happened. It was justified for me to yell at that person because of how they treated me. So you might come up with excuses or have justification, but when we break it down and we look at the consequences, usually that means that relationships are breaking down and emotions are getting in the way if we have to make justifications like that. So we want to learn strategies to meet our emotional needs, but not damage the relationships around us. So one thing I want to clarify, though, when we're talking about emotional regulation, we are not talking about being happy all the time. We're not talking about never having a negative emotion again. That's not the case at all. In fact, it's the opposite. We're making space for those emotions. We're okay with being sad. We're okay with being angry. When we learn to stop fighting our emotions and stepping into them, they cause less damage to our lives. So, emotional regulation is allowing yourself to feel the full range of your emotions without avoidance. So, take, for example, if you emotionally eat. Most everybody does this once in a while, and then you regret it later, right? You're super anxious about something, you're bored, maybe you just got in a fight with your husband, and so you start eating ice cream. Then afterwards, you look at the scale or you don't fit in that outfit and you're like, oh, I should be better about what I eat. We do this all the time Versus if in that moment, if we were to say to ourselves, like, oh, you know what, I feel kind of yucky right now. I'm going to go take 5 minutes to journal about this and step into that emotion and really explore what I'm feeling. Then you're not as likely to engage in those escape behaviors where you're trying to get away from your emotions or you're trying to numb your emotions. So we also want to look at, if we're picturing what emotional regulation is, that we're staying within our values. So that means I might have these strong emotions, these strong physical sensations that are getting in the way and tempting to stray away from my values, but I'm going to stay on course. I'm not going to let those physical or emotional feelings get in the way of my values. The next one is having the ability to see other perspectives. So, a lot of times when it comes to conflict or misunderstanding, we're so rigid in looking at the situation in one way. So, if we can train ourselves to look at situations from multiple perspectives, when we're in a conflict, trying our best to put ourselves in other people's shoes, we'll find that we don't get as angry at people. We're not as insulted because when we start to see a broader perspective, things start to make more sense. Next is being able to accept difficult experiences. This one is huge. In all areas of life, we're going to have difficult experiences, and the energy we put into fighting that rather than accepting it is exhausting and damaging. So we focus on trying to fight things that we cannot control all the time. So if we can get our mind into a space where we can say, I don't like this, but I accept it. It is my new reality. So how do I make the best of it? That's going to help us move forward. That's going to help our emotional regulation. That's going to help us make better choices and put our energy into what will actually help us, versus when we're spending all that energy fighting something we cannot change, we are completely wasting our time. So the next one is allowing yourself to pause and explore the why behind your emotion. If we're just going about our day with these underlying emotions, these underlying stress, a lot of times what that looks like is we're rude to people, we're snapping at people, we're not doing as good of a job at work because we have this underlying stress and we're not dealing with it. And sometimes it's going to come out in physical symptoms, headaches, backaches, stomach aches, muscle tension. So if we just pause and say, hey, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? It releases some of that tension and it makes it less likely that you're going to act out in those other ways. So when it comes to thoughts, the research shows that we can't get rid of bad thoughts. So actually, if you try to stuff your bad thoughts and feelings and try to ignore them, they increase in intensity and duration. So it doesn't work to try and get rid of them. So that's not our goal. Our goal isn't to get rid of bad emotions. Our goal isn't to get rid of bad thoughts, but rather not be so controlled by them. So we can have a thought that says, you know what, I suck, I'm going to fail, this is awful. And then we can just dismiss it. It can be there, and then you can go on and move towards your goal. So often we have these thoughts and we think those thoughts are like the voice of God or something, like we have to listen to them. And so, if your thought is telling you you're going to fail, well, you don't want to fail. That sounds awful, right? So if you're a behavior analyst listening to me right now, the term we use for that is motivating operations, right? You predict something bad is going to happen. That's a reflexive MO. And so if you think something bad is going to happen, you're going to do whatever you can to prevent it. But what if that prediction is wrong? What if your brain is telling you something false? And really listening to that warning actually screws you over because you're going to miss out on something really meaningful. So if you can start to categorize your thoughts as helpful versus hurtful, you can know which ones to dismiss versus which ones to listen to. So examples of harmful regulation, this first one I am so guilty of. It's angst about angst. So I was raised that you always have to be okay. You always have to, just be happy, and so as an adult, I feel anxious or angst when I have a bad feeling. And I automatically go to, how do I get rid of this? I don't like feeling this way. Right. So that's not emotional regulation. Our goal is not to get out of it as quickly as possible. We need to be okay with having that emotion. So I have to tell myself, even to this day, it is okay. I feel anxious. It is okay. I feel sad. And so just giving yourself permission to feel that is part of how we develop emotional regulation. The next one is experiential avoidance. So, experiential avoidance is the ACT therapy term for when we're avoiding what's important. So, we will avoid things through procrastination. We will avoid it through drugs and alcohol. We will avoid it through work sometimes, or even relationships. So, basically, when we're avoiding whatever it is we should be doing, that's called experiential avoidance. And usually that means we're making our problems worse. So the next one is acting without pause. So this is just that reactionary emotional response, and you're not even thinking about it. You're doing what feels reinforcing in the moment, and you are not thinking about your long-term contingencies. You are not thinking about how much you are screwing yourself over in the future. You're just here and now, right? So we have to practice adding the pause. If someone's really rude to us and says something really hurtful, we need to put that pause in there before we do something even more damaging, right? So this is one that takes a lot of practice though, because it's easy to just respond. It's easy to just act without thinking, but that's where we screw ourselves over. So acting before reflection is the same thing, but this adds in the perspective taking as well. So, we want to look at things through another lens. There's a meme I see a lot that's something like, you're in psychology if you can never be mad at people because you understand their history. I don't know. I'm butchering the quote, but it's a true quote. Like, if you understand where somebody's coming from and you understand why they're feeling that way, their hurtful words or their hurtful actions don't hurt as much because their behavior makes more sense. So if we can have that broader perspective, then we're going to deal with those emotions more. So, if you are a behavior analyst, or if you are a nurse or a teacher, and you have somebody going through a really hard time, they might not be treating you well. And that can cause a lot of burnout. But when we look at it from that broader perspective of what they're going through, it makes more sense. Like, it's still not okay you're treated that way, but at least it makes more sense and it's not as personal then. So the last one on this slide is avoiding proactive regulation. So what can happen is throughout the day, your tension can rise. Little stressful moments can happen here and there. And then we just become more and more stressed as the day goes on. So to start this habit, sometimes I myself or I have my clients put an hour timer that goes off in their phone all day long. And so what I want them to do when the hour timer goes off is just a body check. How am I feeling? What do I need? Sometimes just naming your feelings and taking a few deep breaths can reset you, and then it stops that slow build. And so that's going to help prevent some of that reactionary behavior. So instead of the angst about angst, what I want you guys to do is really practice accepting and exploring the emotion. So think about it as like a science project. You have this interesting thing. It's a little dangerous, maybe. I like to think of emotions that way because I don't like them, even though I know I'm supposed to. I don't, right? But if you press into them, if you say, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? Takes the power out of them. It takes the bite out of them. So then you can just non-judgmentally explore what you're feeling. and it's going to help you move forward. It's going to help you make better choices. The next one is experiential avoidance. So if you catch yourself avoiding things, whether it's with healthy things like work, or if it's unhealthy things like alcohol or what have you, your first step is just to notice that you're doing it. Catch that you're doing avoidant behavior, and then stop yourself. Say, hey, you know what? I don't want to screw myself over with avoidance. I'm going to go deal with that issue. I'm going to stop procrastinating. I'm going to turn off Netflix and I'm going to deal with this. So the first step, though, is awareness. So often we're doing it without even realizing it. So we really want to broaden our awareness and our present moment, just noticing when we're doing things that are moving us away from what we care about. The next one is acting without pause, reflection, perspective. So this takes a lot of practice. So this is another one that you could put an alarm in your phone and have it go off just to give you more intentional time of perspective taking and reflection. This is a muscle that needs practicing, and the more you use it, the easier it gets. So last one is just avoiding proactive regulation. Do what you got to do to remember to do this proactively. If we wait until we're super escalated, that's where we make choices that we regret later. So in ACT therapy, values are the core of it. So basically, if we can identify our values, we can get ourselves to do some pretty hard things. But the problem is, all people alive, we have values. No matter who you are, you have values, but we don't always think about what our values are. And the research shows that the farther we are away from our values, the more we struggle with mental health issues, the more we struggle with anxiety and depression, the more we get burnt out. So one thing I'm seeing with COVID and staffing rates and things like that, people are being stretched really thin because there's not enough workers. And so in almost every profession, it seems to be short-staffed. So that has caused a value conflict because people are being asked to do more than they feel like they can on their caseload. And then there's some temptation to lower the quality of care because the need is so great, right? So that's just a small example of value inconsistency can lead to burnout, can lead to stress. So we want to look at what our short-term values are versus our long-term as well. A lot of times our short-term values are going to screw us over, or not always, but like, for example, say you value working out. Your short-term value most likely is going to be, this couch feels pretty comfortable. I'd love to just sit here and chill, right? But that's going to screw over your long-term value of being fit, being in shape, running that race, lifting 500 pounds, whatever your goal is, right? So we need to look at the different kinds of values, our short-term versus our long-term. So some examples of value inconsistency is crabbiness in relationships, not meeting our health goals, and slacking off at work. So if you're feeling burnt out at work, one thing to kind of think about is, what sort of value inconsistency do I have at work? Are these things that I have control over that I could make my values a little more consistent? Do I need to talk to a supervisor? How can I make that more consistent? So sometimes, like, say you're struggling with crabbiness in relationships. You value being a good friend, a good mother, a good father, a good whatever, but you're being kind of crabby all the time, and so sometimes just being aware of our value inconsistency can solve it. Because so often we do these things without even thinking about it or realizing it. And then things around it start to deteriorate and we just don't make the connection. So just bringing awareness to it can help resolve it. So present moment awareness is the second process of ACT that is very important to practice. So as I've mentioned so far, there's a lot of lack of awareness that people do. We love going through life on autopilot just because that's the easiest thing to do. The less we have to think about things, the less we have to intentionally act. Our brain likes that. It's easier. But the problem with that is that's where we slowly start to drift. That's where we start to make choices we don't like. That's where we make mistakes. So if we want to have behavior that is in line with our values, that leads to a happy, fulfilling life, we need present moment awareness. So this means we're aware of our behaviors, we're aware of our physical sensations, our emotional sensations, and the contingencies connected to that moment. So that means I maybe want to choose somebody out, but I recognize that's going to hurt this professional relationship. That's going to hurt my job. So doing that would screw me over. Therefore, I'm not going to do that in this moment. I need to take some deep breaths and step away so I can make better choices, right? So if you get in the practice of checking in with your body, checking in with what you need, you're going to make better choices. When we live life on autopilot, not thinking about what's going on inside of us or what the contingencies are in our environment, we screw ourselves over. So here's some examples. I am so guilty of this one. The second example is report writing. My grammar and spelling gets awful when I'm not fully present in the moment. I make so many mistakes that way. Autopilot leads to mistakes and missed reinforcement. So if you think of your favorite memory of all time, you were fully present there. You were 100% in that moment. That's part of what made it so reinforcing. When we're multitasking, when we're not fully in the present moment, we are missing out on reinforcement. We're missing out on quality time. We're missing out on building relationships. And a lot of times we're causing conflict because we aren't fully present. The last one is therapy sessions. That one relates to my profession, but this could be any of you like working with clients. You're going to have better outcomes if you're fully present in those moments. You're going to connect better. You're going to build a rapport better. You're going to make more progress if you are present. So acceptance. This one is so huge. So acceptance is really hard for all of us because there's so many crappy things in life that suck and you just want to change them and you can't. But the more you can get somebody to the point where they can accept hard and difficult things, the better their emotional regulation is going to be. So one activity that I really like to do is just take a little note card and on one side, write your value, what's really important to you. And then on the other side, write the cost of it, some of the like yucky things about it. So using my schooling, I really wanted to get a PhD. I really wanted to know more things so I could help more people. And so that was a really important goal to me. But there was a lot of costs that came along with it as well. Financially, time, family, all of that kind of stuff had a big cost, right? But you can't separate the two. I can't have a PhD without those costs that came with it. So sometimes when you do an activity like that, it helps to open up people's eyes to see that, yes, this sucks. Like giving up all my free time sucks, but it'll be worth it in the end. It's worth what it's leading me towards. So that's just one example of how we can get people to accept things. Sometimes we have to accept things that don't come with a value. So say a person gets a diagnosis of cancer, or this weekend I broke some bones in my spine and so or cracked them. And so like there isn't a value there that I'm like, oh, I have to break my back in order to get this. There wasn't. So now I have to shift my thinking as to like, okay, this happened, this sucks. Now, how do I refocus? How do I move forward from here? What's productive now? Versus if I would fixate on this sucks so bad that I hurt my back, this sucks so bad how much pain I'm in, I'd just be in a miserable place and nothing good would happen from that. So I need to look for, what can I do next? How can I move forward? And so acceptance looks a little different when it's not connected to something you want in that way. But you can reconnect it to, okay, I want to live a full life. Yes, I got this bad diagnosis, or yes, this horrible thing happened. My mom died, or something like that happened. Now, how do I honor her memory? How do I rebuild? How do I move towards that meaningful life that I want with this new truth in my life? So here's some other examples of acceptance and how to work through it. So the first one is a woman with depression and unemployment. So this woman had some pretty big insecurities about going back to work, but she was also really, really depressed and had a low self-esteem because she wasn't working. So it was this kind of circular thing. And so getting her to accept that if you're going to go to work, you're going to feel insecure, and there'll be moments where you feel inadequate and unqualified, and that's okay. That is worth it, because that will solve this other pain you've been feeling. If you can get her to connect that, she can work through that, and she might be willing to face that fear. But when she's only focused on the insecurity, she's not accepting it. She's not okay with feeling insecure, so she's not going to take that step. So focusing on that acceptance can help her move forward. This next one is me in Ecuador. So this is a picture from Ecuador. My husband has family that grew up in the Amazon. And so we went to visit them. And during that time, we only ate what we could hunt and gather and fish. And that was one of our meals right there in that picture. And so that was hard for me to accept. There was no plumbing or electricity, nothing like that, right? But I wanted that for my children, that memory. I wanted that for my family, right? So I had to accept there are some really uncomfortable things about this. And that is okay. It is part of the experience. So while I was there, when things that happened that made me uncomfortable, I would repeat to myself in my head, I can accept this. I can accept this. This is part of the experience, right? I needed that self-talk so I didn't engage in escape behavior, or I didn't just get a horrible attitude. Canceling plans, getting cancer, I kind of talked about already. So often when we don't accept things, we just sit there and focus on that negative thing, and then we're not moving forward at all. So acceptance is about, you're not fighting it anymore. You're looking for a way to move forward. So contextual self is the process of ACT that focuses on perspective taking. So a lot of times the angst that we feel or the conflicts that we're in come from lack of perspective. So we really need to have broader perspectives so that we don't have this rigid thinking that leads us to conflict. Sometimes we might be okay with choices, for example, and then think about, oh gosh, how would people feel if they saw me act this way? Like, I want people to think I'm kind. I want people to think I'm a loving person, but how I just acted was not very loving. So taking a step back and looking at that broader perspective can help motivate you to change your behavior. This also applies to rule governed behavior about self-esteem and things like that. So take an athlete who has an injury. Their identity was in being a basketball player or something like that. And then they blow out their knee and they can't play anymore. If they have that rigid perspective of, my value only lines up with me being an athlete, they are going to struggle really bad losing their athletic ability, right? So we need that broader perspective of, our value is more than that. And so from there, you can then take action steps for building a meaningful life. But if you're so focused on, I don't have value anymore, you're going to be focused on escape behavior. You're going to crawl into a hole and you're going to isolate and you're going to make away behaviors that are not moving you towards your values and not moving you towards a happy life. So some examples of contextual self is there's only one way to do things. You maybe have some coworkers you could picture that maybe you feel frustrated working with sometimes because it's their way or no way at all, right? Like that can be frustrating if you're working with a person like that. So that's why it's valuable for us to reflect on ourselves. Am I that person? Am I the rigid person that is just only willing to do things a certain way? I already talked about the athletic example. The next one after that is, I can't be your friend because you hurt me. So sometimes people will hold grudges or people will just be stuck in this one moment and never move on from it. And so there's situations like abusive relationships and what have you, where it's good to set boundaries like that. But a lot of times in relationships, we all make mistakes and we all have to give forgiveness and get forgiveness in return as well. And so we need that perspective taking of where the person might be coming from, or maybe that they didn't mean to hurt you at all. And actually they were trying to help you. It just came out wrong, or, that kind of thing. Perspective taking is going to help us have more flexible behavior. It's going to help us move forward in those times where we feel like we can't. But like a lot of these processes, it's a muscle that you need to practice on a daily basis. So next is diffusion. So diffusion refers to our emotional regulation. And this is a really important process because our emotions are very commonly what gets in the way of our goals. So the first point is the ability to not allow your thoughts and feelings to control you. Many times people feel like they're a victim of their emotions. And so changing your mentality on that, understanding and living in a way where I can feel whatever, but I don't have to act on that. Yes, I'm tired, but I'm still going to work out. Yes, I'm tired, but I can still finish this job with perfect quality. So, this is where like so often we have these strong emotions and we think they're the boss. We think it justifies poor behavior. And so if we start to practice, I can feel this, I can think this, but I don't have to act on it, there starts to be a separation from us, our values, our behaviors, and the things we're thinking and feeling. They can be two separate and opposite things. I see this a lot when people are talking about courage. They think they can't apply for a promotion. They can't do this thing that scares them until they feel confident. Well, if they have that mentality, they're probably never going to be there. The truth is, we need to do things afraid. We need to do things when our emotions don't match, or we will be holding ourselves back. So some examples of strategies for overcoming emotions is naming your stories. So what that means is, say you have a common theme of a way that you like really struggle emotionally or with thoughts, name it. So I have one client who calls the negative voice in her head Nancy, negative Nancy. And so she just names it like, oh, negative Nancy's here. This is what she's saying. And so giving it that name takes some of the power out of it and helps her not to listen to it. So if you have a theme in your negative thinking or in your emotions, insecure Sally or doom and gloom Gary, whatever your theme is, naming it can help, and it can just take the power out of it a little bit. So helpful versus hurtful thoughts is a strategy for just categorizing your thoughts. It's human to have negative thoughts, but we don't have to listen to them. We don't have to act on them. So if we simply categorize like, oh, I had a thought, was that hurtful or helpful? no, not helpful. So I'm going to just let it pass. Some people really like the visual of picturing thoughts on a cloud or like on a leaf that's going down a river, and they just watch it in their brain just float away. It just drifted away. I don't have to worry about it. That's their way of kind of releasing those thoughts that they don't want to act on. The next one is changing an and into a but, or vice versa. So what that one means is like, I want to work out, but I'm tired, is what people would say if they're making an excuse. Versus if you change it to an and, it's no longer an excuse. It's just additional information. Like, I want to work out and I'm tired. So it's not an excuse anymore. You're just going to work out tired. And chances are you're going to feel better afterwards anyway. So often our thoughts and our feelings are a but, an excuse. And so if we change it to an and, it's no longer an excuse for us. So the next one is thanking your mind. So what this one refers to is you're acknowledging the thoughts. Because again, I'm not trying to get you guys to stuff your thoughts and feelings. I want you to experience them. I want you to notice them and then just not act on them. So this bad thought comes in, this bad feeling comes in, acknowledge it, name it, and then say, thanks, but no thanks. I'm not going to act on that. So you're making space for it. You're just not letting it change your behaviors. So lastly is committed action. So when you go through all of these processes of ACT, you've identified your values, you've worked on acceptance, you've worked on your awareness of it, your perspective taking, you worked through some of those really tough emotions and thoughts about it. Now we want to hammer out, what are the action steps? What can you do today to move towards your values? What can you do today to take you one step closer? And so these need to be really specific. Say you want to be healthier. If you just said, today I'm going to be healthier, that means nothing. What the heck does that mean, right? We want something more tangible than that. So I am going to go to the grocery store and I am going to buy these 3 recipes that I can make and meal prep for the rest of the week, right? So we want a really specific, tangible plan that we can act on today. And so sometimes, depending on what your values are and what your goals are, you maybe want to make a today action step, a week action step, a couple week, a month action step. And from there, you can make your plan towards moving towards your goals. So take, for example, I mentioned earlier that I broke some bones along my spine. So if I were to have that rigid thinking of, this sucks, I hate that I'm injured and all of that kind of stuff, I would be in a pretty negative space, right? And I would maybe be at home feeling miserable, just watching Netflix all day, right? But I had to think to myself and readjust that perspective on, okay, this is my new reality. How can I make the best of it right now? How can I move forward? So my recovery is likely going to be several months of working through this. So when I think about that, that seems really far off. And I love working out and things like that. I was training for a triathlon and I can't do that now, right? So looking at that long term is too much. But what isn't too much is looking at today. Today I showered independently, and that was something I could celebrate, right? So when we're thinking about committed action, we want to think about those small, tangible steps that are going to move us towards our goals. And we want to celebrate those small steps, because otherwise, too often, our goals and our values, they seem so far away, and that just feels defeating. So we want to focus on what can we celebrate today? What can we achieve today to make us feel like we're successful, to make us feel like we're moving towards an end goal that lines up with our values. So some examples here, operational definitions. So that's a behavior analytic term that refers to like just making it really specific. So any person alive can read that and agree what it means. So like the example I shared earlier when I said like, I want to be healthier. Well, what does that mean? That can mean 100 different things. So we want to be really specific. Next, you want it to be measurable. So we want to pick things that you can take data on. The research shows that if you take data on a goal, you're more likely to reach it. So we want whatever you're working on to be something that you can measure and take data on. Next is contingencies. So set up contingencies, set up ways to celebrate. If you meet this short-term goal, we're going to celebrate in this way. I love doing social contingencies just because social is really motivating to me. So I have a group of friends that we do these 100-day challenges. You know, we make bets where everybody puts money in, and then we all pick our own personal goals. And then we track for 100 days how we're doing on those goals. And the person who's most consistent with working towards their goal gets the whole jackpot, right? So it's this fun social accountability. And so, you know, whatever works for you, whatever's motivating for you, that tying something like that to your goal just helps you reach it, keeps you motivated, and makes it a little more fun. So this is my contact information. My email is there, and you can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Behavior Boss. I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see here. I got to move you guys. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to go to questions now. So if anyone has questions, they should be in my chat here. Let's see here. It looks like there are not any questions. I'll give you guys just a couple minutes. If you would like to put questions in the chat, feel free. This topic, emotional regulation, I think is super important. People are more stressed than they've ever been. People are stretched so thin. And so, you know, ACT is something that I use on myself. I use with my clients. I just love it because I feel like it treats the whole picture. It targets behaviors, but then it also targets those internal events that, you know, our thoughts and our feelings that so often get in the way and kind of screw us over. And so if we can learn strategies as to how to overcome them or how to not let them kind of rule our life, we're going to be happier. We're going to be more consistent with our values. And so our lives will be better then. So let me see about that chat. All right. Oh, not yet. Okay, there are no questions, it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I hope that you guys enjoyed this presentation. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments. My email again is katiejsaint@gmail.com. All right, everyone, thanks so much for coming. Oh, wait, just kidding. There's some questions now. Let me just read them quick. Okay. How do you deal with being so busy with work that you feel like you don't have time to pause and deal with your emotions? Okay, so that's an awesome question. Sometimes we are so busy, but hopefully at all of your work, you have a bathroom break. You know, hopefully you have 2 minutes that you can go to the bathroom. Sometimes even taking 30 seconds in the bathroom to process things or, you know, that kind of thing can do a lot. Like sometimes you're going to be so crazy busy at work that you don't have time to process your emotions and you need to kind of compartmentalize until a later time. but hopefully you can step away, even if it's just for a minute or two, and just think to yourself, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? Okay, that makes sense. Now in this moment, what do I need to focus on? So that should help you get through that. So let's see here. There's 3 more questions, it looks like. The next one is, any good tips with help for identifying values? So when it comes to identifying values, I feel like people's pain is a really good place to start. Usually people can tell you what bothers them about their life or what they wish was different. And so once we kind of start exploring like where their pain comes from, then that leads to a value that can identify what it is they want, because not having it is giving them pain, right? So sometimes you can see people's values in just talking to them and asking them and saying like, hey, what's important to you in life? There is value assessments out there that you can use if you want. But you can also pick up on people's values in their conversations. They might talk about like, I'm not a mean person, but blah 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 blah. So if they like feel like they have to qualify it like that, they probably value being a nice person and they feel bad they weren't in that moment, right? So you pick up on those cues, you kind of look for it in conversation, and then that allows you to be able to know their values a little bit more. Someone said, can you please put the contact info back up? And then the next one is, what are some methods for overcoming inconsistency? So let me just reshare the screen so I can put my contact info back up. Let's see here. Will it let me? Okay. Here we go. Okay. So I'll leave this up while I answer that last question of what do you do with value inconsistency? So present moment awareness is the process that really addresses that, because a lot of times people are inconsistent with their values without realizing it, or they have competing contingencies where it's like they have 2 values happening at once. And so then it's really hard for them to be consistent with their values. So just having the conversation, making them aware of it, having them sit down and think about, what do I value most? That is where I should put my attention. That is where I should put my energy. Sometimes we're so busy with life, we are just going through the emotions and we were just in survival mode. And so we're not thinking about our values. So even a 5-minute conversation sometimes about your values can really help change your perspective, change your behaviors, and like get you in line with your values. I know some couples that I work with for marriage counseling, they actually schedule every 6 months a values check date. And so what they do on that date is just evaluate their life together and say, hey, how are we doing as a couple with staying consistent with our values? Are we creating the family that we value and that we want to be? Are we living the life that we wanted to live? So you could do that with yourself as well. You could do a monthly values check-in where you literally put it in your calendar and you like check yourself once a month and just say, how am I doing? Am I consistent? Do I need to make changes? There was a period of time where I actually put an alarm in my phone 3 times a day and it would go off. And that was a values check for me, that I was supposed to check in with myself and, am I regulated? Am I in line with my emotions? Am I in line with my values? And sometimes it would catch me. Like I remember this one time it went off. My son was going on and on about this topic. that I didn't really care about that much. And I had a lot of things to do and I wasn't being the best listener. I was just being like, okay. And so the alarm went off. I'm like, oh crap, I'm not being a good mom right now. I'm not being a good listener. I was inconsistent with my values. And so that was really helpful for me to just like wake me up and be like, oh yeah, Katie, check yourself. Like you care about being a good mother who's a good listener, who makes your son feel valued. So listen to his story about Minecraft or whatever. So, all right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to make sure no more questions popped in. Let's see here. I think, this next question, how would you encourage a younger client who is anxious about trying these methods? I always go back to their pain. So like I would identify like, hey, like depending on their age, like I know you feel yucky about this. I know you're not feeling happy. And so these strategies are going to help you feel better. These strategies are to help you be happy again and to help you figure out how to deal with these big emotions. So it always ties back to how it's benefiting them. We should never be telling a client to do something or a student to do something without giving them the why. So that's going to look different how you explain it based on their age or their functioning level. But we always want to give them the why and how this benefits them, how this connects to them. Next one. Do you see stress levels in health workers getting better in the past year? So the research I've looked at is not that recent as far as COVID numbers. So the overall research that I've seen right now is pretty negative as far as mental health for all people. Healthcare workers are stretched really thin. I would love to see some updated research based on the past 6 months even, to see if it's better. I would suspect it's starting to get better, but I haven't seen that come out yet. Next one. Can you talk about setting up healthy boundaries? What should signal a person that a boundary is needed, especially when trying to see someone from another person's perspective? Okay, so boundaries is all about prioritizing values. And so we need to set boundaries to protect our values. And so I hate setting boundaries. I like to say yes to people, all of that kind of stuff. But if we don't set boundaries, we can't live an effective life. We're going to run ourselves down. We're going to not be in a good place. And so boundaries protect that. And so when we have clarity around what's important to us and what is needed for you to live the value-driven life that you want to live, then you're going to feel more comfortable setting those boundaries. Some people were raised in homes where healthy boundary setting was modeled. And if you were raised in a home like that, setting boundaries is a little easier for you. Other people were raised in homes where setting boundaries was not respected, was not honored. And so then as an adult, learning to set boundaries is really hard, but it is needed if you are going to be a stable, happy, healthy adult. You need to set boundaries. And so the place to start with that is just identifying your values. What do you need? What's important to you? Like thinking about healthcare workers being stretched thin right now. If one of your values is to do a really good job with your clients, then you need to set boundaries on how many you can see. When I first started out, I would see 9 clients a day for counseling. And my compassion by the time I got to the 9th client went down because I was burnt out from seeing clients back to back all day long. And so I learned in order for me to be fully present, fully compassionate and there with my client, I can't see that many people in a day. So you need to know what works for you. You need to pay attention to your body and your cues, and you need to be aware of what your values are. And from there, hopefully that'll give you some clarity on where you need to set boundaries. All right, so let's see here. This person says, this has been super helpful. Are there red flags that you see for which you refer patients for or parents for medicine? So I personally can't prescribe medicine, but I do tell people to make an appointment with their doctor sometimes if we are trying behavioral strategies, if their anxiety or their depression is so extreme, and these behavioral strategies or these, ACT therapy, different things like that, if we're not seeing a lot of results and their anxiety is crippling them, it's sabotaging work, it's sabotaging their relationships, things like that. Sometimes we talk about if medication might be a good support for them. And so I might make a referral to their doctor in situations like that. Medication is not my go-to as like the first recommendation, but I do acknowledge that a lot of people benefit from medication and function really awesome in life if they just have a little bit more of that chemical to balance themselves. And there's no shame in that. There's a lot of really high functioning people in this world, CEOs, doctors, whoever, who need medication on a daily basis. And so, I try to work with my clients on it if they need that or not. With the ADHD diagnosis, that is a more common one where I might recommend they talk to their doctor about something like that if the behavioral strategies are not working and it's really sabotaging a lot of things. But yeah, so that's that one. And that is it for questions. All right, everyone, thank you so much for coming and listening. I hope that you enjoyed my presentation and feel free to reach out.